Greetings, Take Fivers. I want to welcome you to a truncated online version of Take 5 2021. Since my last introduction in the fall semester, a great many things have changed. We're still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, but now there are at least 3 vaccines that, as I speak to you today, are being stuck in the arms of Americans all over the country. I'm not sure when my own vaccination time will come, but I certainly hope yours has, or that it is at least on the near horizon. I also hope that you and those closest to you have persevered through this very tough year. When giving thought to this year's theme, we settled on friendship, knowing that many people around the world are enduring isolation and loneliness, as well as a host of other tribulations. Perhaps now more than ever, we're reminded just how irreplaceable a good friend is. In this short season, then, we'll read 2 books, the first of which is featured in this broadcast. Our presenter for John Fowles' A Separate Peace is Hugh Prevost, who participated on last year's Absalom panel, and the year before that on the panel for the set of books based on the Frontier theme. You may recall that he gave a terrific presentation on Simon Winchester's The Professor and the Madman. I was mighty fortunate Hugh chose A Separate Peace, in large part because this is a novel I should have read back in high school. In fact, I seem to remember most of my high school chums reading it in their English classes, and I wondered when my time was up. So here's to making up for lost time. Before the remainder of this broadcast is turned over to Hugh, let me remind you that the live panel discussion of the novel will be held on Tuesday, March 2nd at 6 p.m. We hope you'll join us. Our other book for this truncated season is Marian Wright Edelman's Lanterns, A Memoir of Mentors. Verby Prevost's presentation on the book will be available for viewing on YouTube by March 16th, and a live Zoom session for all who would like to discuss it will be held on Tuesday, March 30th at 6 p.m. Each live Zoom session will include our 2 other panelists, Katie Riansky and Cliff Cleveland. Thank you once again for being a loyal Take 5 attendee. Frankly put, if the response hadn't been so positive after last semester's discussion of crossing to safety, we might have let the season lapse altogether. But it would have been a mistake to do so. Friendship is Take 5's theme this year, but friendship is also what Take 5 is and does. Thanks, friends, for not giving up on us. You can expect us to be back in full force next year on campus when this pandemic is over. And now I'll hand the rest of the time over to Hugh Prevost.
Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. I hope that all of you are doing well and that many of you, especially you older ones, have received at least one of the COVID-19 shots and hopefully both. I would like to begin with a brief biography of John Knowles and a short look at the critical reception of his most popular book. Knowles was born on September the 16th, 1926 in Fairmont, West Virginia, and entered Phillips Exeter Academy at 15. He graduated in 1945 and received his bachelor's degree from Yale in 1949. He worked as a reporter and as a drama critic for the Hartford Courant for a few years, and then served as associate editor of Holiday, a travel magazine from 1956 to 1960. He was also a freelance writer. Encouraged by Thornton Wilder to write about his vivid memories, Knowles based A Separate Peace, his first novel, on his years at Phillips Exeter Academy. Published by Macmillan in 1960, A Separate Peace won the William Faulkner Foundation Award and the Rosenthal Award of the National Institute of Arts and Letters, and soon came to be compared with classics like Catcher in the Rye by Salinger and Lord of the Flies by Golding. The novel, which drew good reviews, was also a wonderful commercial success, selling more than 8 million copies. In 1972, as a matter of fact, it was made into a film by Paramount Pictures. As a matter of fact, Knowles once told an interviewer that he did not mind having his reputation rest on a single book. He said, "It paid the bills for 30 years. It's made my career possible. Unlike most writers, I don't have to do anything else to make a living. Knowles wrote many more books, but A Separate Peace and its sequel, A Peace Breaks Out, in 1982, are his only novels still in print. One British critic writes, Knowles, who died in 2001, won awards and praise from literary greats when he wrote A Separate Peace. One imagines he's rather taken for granted in America by bored students made to read his works for exams. But for the British readers, unfamiliar with him, reading this novel will feel like unearthing a forgotten gem. Before we launch completely into the novel, I'd like to a discussion of A Separate Peace. I want to take a minute to remind us of our general theme for this year's Take 5, friendship. It is certainly a major theme in Knowles' Separate Peace and seems to be almost as complicated as we had in our discussion of Crossing to Safety, with interesting relationships between the two couples and the four main characters. As we discuss in that novel, there seems to be a great deal of tension between characters for one reason or another. And to me, I believe I said, that tension was mainly caused by the strong will and manipulation of one character, Charity, who I believe some critics have called the snake in the garden. Well, if there is such an external force in A Separate Peace, an external force that is the subterfuge of the novel, I think it would have to be World War II. For it is the one thing that looms over and outside of the peaceful atmosphere of the Devon School, and a force that all of the boys have to face again and again, even if they try in their own ways to escape that reality. The main friendship in A Separate Peace explores is the one between Phineas Finney and Jean Forrester. There are others that are developed along the way, some imagined and some short-termed. I know that each of us has our own definition of what friendship is, and we could spend the whole time discussing those and applying them to our discussion. In my recent reading, I found a description of friendship that I'd like for you to ruminate on. Here it is. A true friend is someone you can rely on regardless of the circumstances. While they may give you advice you don't want to hear from time to time, a true friend will never lead you purposely down the wrong road. They tell you as it is while presenting the truth to make it easier for you to receive. A true friend has your back. A true friend is authentic and honest with you. A true friend accepts you for what you are. A true friend wants what's best for you. A true friend never abandons you. As we discussed in this Crossing to Safety, and we'll see in A Separate Peace, a friend or friendship is not always perfect. A friend will at times disappoint you, upset you. The friendship may be strained to the point of breaking. What matters, however, what matters most is how you and your friend react to those situations and to the disappointments that they spawn. The novel begins with our protagonist narrator, Jean Forrester, returning to Devon after 15 years of being away and visiting two spots on campus that have become focal points of fear. The story proper is essentially two stories, a story within a story. At the first part of the first chapter, he trudges across the wet, muddy playing fields to find the tree, the place that sets the friendship of Jean and Finney, and later becomes the place where the first tragedy occurs. He then returns to campus to find the white marble steps in the first building, the place where the second tragedy occurs. Gene's first-person narration is important to our understanding of the novel because the novel's events are entirely presented through the lens of one person, or maybe I should say two. The young man who narrates most of the novel, but also the older Gene who's looking back on his Devon life. As the older Gene looks back, we see action as it happens in the years 1942 and 43. But those actions must also be seen and also must be understood as they are filtered through the lens of that older man looking back 15 years. Since the novel is framed as a flashback, remembrance and the accuracy of that remembrance is also important to consider. There are times when Knowles seems to force his readers to question whether the events actually transpired as the young Gene describes or as the old Gene remembers. And I would like to say that though most of the narration after the first chapter is mainly in the voice of the 16-year-old Gene, there seems to me several times throughout the novel when the language used in the narration is somewhat beyond the vocabulary and the understanding of a 16-year-old, and not just in the first 6 pages. But that's another paper. The story proper begins in the summer of 1942, set in the fictional Devon School. The setting is an idyllic setting that Knowles built from his own prep school experience at Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. The setting is an American idyllic, a picture painting like those from the great Hudson Valley painters, ongoing, the scene stretching far and wide and unspoiled. Gene describes this setting in chapter 2. Beyond the gym and the fields began the woods, our Devon School's woods, which in my imagination were the beginning of a great northern forests. I thought that from the Devon woods, trees reached an unbroken and widening corridor so far to the north that no one had ever seen the other end. Somewhere up in those far, unorganized tips of Canada. We seem to be playing on the same fringe of that last and greatest wilderness. Bombs in Europe were completely unreal to us here. Not because we couldn't imagine it. 1,000 newspaper photographs and newsreels had given us plenty of accurate picture of such a sight. But because out here, this place, here, too fair for us to accept anything like that. We spent the summer in complete selfishness, I'm happy to say. Devon Summer 42 begins as a stay against the outside confusion and chaos of the outside world. Even the faculty at Devon treat the reduced summer school session with bemused tolerance, and the boys too. They seem to look past the traditional Devon set rules and accept the new freedom from those rules. In the summertime, the Devon sun always seems to shine, the days endlessly filled with games on the playing field. Gene even says, I think we reminded them of what peace was like, we boys of 16. We were registered at no draft board. We had taken no physical exams. No one had ever tested us for hernia or colorblindness. We were careless and wild. And I suppose we could be thought of as a song of life, that the war was being fought to preserve, a sign of life that the war was being fought to preserve. Anyway, they were indulgent toward us, more so than any other time. They snapped at the heels of the seniors, driving and molding them for war. They noticed our games tolerantly, and we reminded them of what peace was like, of lives which were not bound with destruction. It is here in this time, or timelessness, our two characters begin their journey and their friendship. We learn early that Jean and Finney are roommates. They are the same age, about the same build, 5'8" and a half inches tall and about 150 pounds. With all these similarities, the two are separate individuals, though those lines become somewhat blurred during the narration. Jean, short for Eugene, which is Greek for well-born. Jean is from a southern affluent family, affluent enough to send him to prep school. His identity isn't as secure as his name suggests. To underline his southern heritage, Jean puts up posters on his wall of a large southern estate to represent his home. Over my cot, I had long ago taped pictures which together amounted to a barefaced lie about my background. Weepingly romantic views of plantation mansions, moss-hung trees by moonlight, roads winding dustily toward cabins. When asked about them, I acquired an accent appropriate to the town 3 states south of my own. I had transmitted without actually saying it that this was my family place. One of the major contrasts between the two boys is that Jean is presented throughout the novel as a conscientious or somewhat conscientious scholar student, while Finney is represented as almost the total opposite. Jean says, I was more and more certainly becoming the best student in the school. Phineas, without question, the best athlete. So in that we were even. But while he was a very poor student, I was a pretty good athlete. Finney is good-natured, fun-loving, possesses a careless charm. Jean says that his life was ruled by inspiration and anarchy. As we read further into the novel, we realize that Finney also has a total disregard, or at least defiance, of most any rules. That is, the conventional rules of Devon, rules that he has to know, not Finney. He is quite happy to make exception for all rules, except for those that he devises and expect those that play his games to play within. Whether they are rules about the game Finney has made up, or some of the strict rules about life, like chastising Jean for saying he was 5'9", when in fact he was only 5'8" and a half. And Jean and the rest of the boys simply accept and fall carefully into step, complying. Finney is certainly freer and careless, and he has a careless grace even when he's talking about even when he's talking to the faculty. While Jean and most of his classmates act and speak as expected, properly with regard to the addressed person's class and station, Jean just speaks out, simply, honestly, not always logically, but always quite convincingly. He speaks freely to the members of the school administration. While these adults are somewhat taken aback, they never rebuke Finney for his behavior or his comments. They seem sincere. He seems confident, and they're always well-intended. Finney is also a unique individual, and his tendency to resist conformity is part of that uniqueness. As a matter of fact, Finney epitomizes individuality. His confidence and his choices often cause discomfort in others, but his hypnotic self-assurance wins them over, especially Jean, who becomes his comrade in arms, his best pal. With the interaction of these two, the novel unfolds, and quickly they fall into a routine of games with evenings of study, but with strange interludes where Finney lures Jean away from the rules of Devon to experience a new set of rules and a new set of adventures, all made up by Finney. The first two rule-breaking episodes that Jean buys buys into are the forbidden jump from the tree and the overnight escape to the beach. The first sets the bond between the two boys. Finney comes up with the idea of jumping from the tree limb into the Devon River, and Jean soon buys into it. Finney climbs up the rungs nailed to the tree with the abandon of a wild panther. Jean is more careful in his climb, and remarkably, Knowles ironically foreshadows what's to come later in that tree when Jean, unsure of his balance, almost falls, but Finney reaches out his hand, steadies Jean, and prevents that fall. Both boys jump, and the bond is formed. "It's you, pal," Finney said to me at last. "Just you and me." He and I started back across the fields, preceding the others like two seigneurs. The lords of the summer have been determined, and the other boys are mere retainers after them. The escape to the beach is an important moment in this relationship, because it is here that we first see the evidence of the tension that grows between the two boys, or maybe I should say it grows in Jean, at least. Again, the boys break the rules by riding their bikes to the beach and end up staying overnight, missing dinner and breakfast. The main tension, however, is more internal. First, Finney declares that he considers Jean his best pal. This pronouncement shakes Jean because he can't reciprocate. He says, it was a courageous thing to say. Exposing a sincere emotion nakedly like that at Devon School was the next thing to suicide. I should have told him that he was my best friend also, and rounded off what he had said. I started to. I really did. I nearly did. But something held me back. Perhaps I was stopped by that level of feeling, deeper than thought, which contains the truth. Unlike the freewheeling, confident Finney, Jean is much more reticent, unable to break rules, even his own set of personal rules. Returning to campus, he fails his first test because he's missed the time to study for it and from his escape with Finney. It is here, the breaking of Jean's idea and ideal of himself as the super scholar, that tensions begin to arise. That evening, after flunking the exam, the two boys begin talking about Jean's desire to be head of the class. And it is here where Jean begins to develop a new and different feeling about Finney. Yes, he sort of envied Finney's athletic prowess, but he seemingly has offset that envy by the realization that he's really almost equal. But that evening, something more ominous takes over Jean's mind. He begins to suspect that Finney's innocent rule-breaking and time-wasting may serve a darker purpose. As Finney teases him about studies and tries to get him to desert his books for fun, Jean begins to think that Finney secretly wants him to fail. And suddenly, what was friendship with a little envy becomes a bitter rivalry in Jean's mind, with Finney deliberately plotting to undermine Jean's studies by leading him off into one of Finney's weird excursions, games of the week, or to the weekly meeting of the Suicide Society. Thinking while studying that evening, Jean says, "You and Phineas are already even. You are even in enmity. You are both coldly driving ahead for yourselves alone. You did hate him for breaking that school swimming record, but so what? He hated you for getting an A in every course last term but one. You would have had an A except for him. The second realization broke as clearly and bleakly as the dawn of the beach. Finney had deliberately set out to wreck my studies. That explained Blitzball. That explained nightly meetings of the Super Suicide Society. That explained his insistence that I share all of his diversions. It was cold trickery. It was calculated. It was all enmity. We were even, after all, even in enmity. The deadly rivalry was on both sides, after all. I had detected that Finney was a den of lonely, selfish ambition. If I were a psychologist or a counselor, I might suggest that there's some projection going on here. Gene has now decided that Finney must be his deadly rivalry, and that his playful roommate plans a deliberate plot to undermine the studying that Gene requires to become the best student in school. But to keep this dark secret, Gene continues to go along with Finney's outings, including nightly meetings of the Suicide Society, until one evening Finney asked him to come up to see Lepper, another school friend, jump from the tree. Sullenly, Gene agrees to go, but he tells Finney angrily that it will ruin his chances for a good grade in French. Astonished that his friend must work hard to succeed at school, Finney tells Gene that he should stay and study if he needs the time. But Gene goes. As they walk toward the tree, an interesting thing happens in Gene's mind. It reverses itself, and he thinks, it wasn't my neck, but my understanding that was menaced. He had never been jealous of me for a second. Now I knew there never was and never could have been any rivalry between us. I was not the same quality as he. I couldn't stand this. Finney proposes a double jump with Gene. They strip, climb up the tree. Finney goes out on the limb first, and then Gene steps out, bends his knees, jostles the limb, causing Finney to lose his balance and fall with a thickening thud to the bank. Gene then moves out on the limb and dives into the water, suddenly fearless. I plodded along so far carefully to explore the relationship and the determination and the deterioration of it that Gene and Finney have in the first part of the novel, in hopes to build up to this climatic scene of the climatic scene of the first third of the novel. I was hoping to exploit the same suspense that Knowles builds in Finney's fall, and to Gene's bending his knees and jouncing the tree, causing Finney's fall. The motive had seemed evident: envy, rivalry, competition, even anger. But what do you do with that last bit of self-recognition before the boys even climbed the tree? What do you do with Gene's acknowledgement that Finney was not jealous, not envious of Gene's ability, but really supportive of him, and even challenged them to develop in a different way? As Finney tells Gene before they leave to jump the tree, if you're really good at something, I mean, if there's nobody or hardly nobody who's as good as you are, then you've got to be serious about that. Don't mess around, for God's sake. The fall. We are now faced with the consequences of the fall. Physically for Finney and psychologically for Gene. The novel has changed. The peace of the summer of 42 has been broken. Gene now has to face himself, but also has to try to face Finney. He makes an attempt immediately after the fall while Finney is still in the infirmary. The scene reveals guilt, all the guilt, the fear and anger that Gene feels toward Finney. Dreading a direct accusation, Gene hesitantly probes Finney's memory of the fall, hoping, it seems, to find a lapse of memory that will make his guilt disappear. When Finney remembers an urge to reach out and catch on to his friend as if as a first attempt to save himself, Gene reacts in anger. To pull me down? To drag me down too? Confusing his own unspoken violent impulses with Finney's simple and innocent instinct to save himself. The boys go on exploring Finney's fall, with Finney describing something about a drugged up feeling he had, but dismissing it and then apologizing to Gene for even thinking about it. Gene then realizes, I couldn't say anything to his sincere drugged apology for having suspected the truth. He was never going to accuse me. It was a feeling that he had, and at this moment, he must have been formulating a new commandment in his own personal decalogue. Never accuse a friend of a crime if you only have a feeling he did it. Gene's second attempt at confession comes when he visits Finney at Finney's Boston home after the fall break. But like the first, even though Gene admits he caused the accident, I jounced the tree, I caused it. I deliberately jounced the tree so you would fall off. Finney rejects the confession and tells Gene that he'll kill him if he doesn't sit down and shut up. Gene's confession does not fit into Finney's version of their friendship, their palship, their brotherhood. Though Gene has confessed, the confession is not accepted, and not accepted, it can't be forgiven or absolved or forgotten. Gene has to live with it. Gene leaves to return to Winter Devon, and it's here that the novel takes a radical turn in tone, in setting, and in matters of brotherhood. The first sentence of chapter 6 sets that tone. Peace had deserted Devon. One of Gene's first adventures when he comes back is to try to become assistant crewmaster, but it ends in a fight with Quackenbush, where Gene ends up falling into the muddy, brackish, slimy Nagusamat River, the other river at Devon, and one quite different from the soothing waters of the summer Devon River. He then runs in to Mr. Ludsbury, the regular term faculty manager of the dorm, who further sets the tone of the new term. Ludsbury notices Gene on his return from the boathouse wet, muddy, and unkempt, and he launches into a harsh condemnation of the summer behavior and summer freedoms that supposedly occurred in his dormitory, and emphatically says to Gene, there won't be any more of it. Rules, regulations, decorum have returned to Winter Devon. It's only Finney's phone call from home that lifts Gene out of this doldrum and restores the glimpse of friendship and companionship, and somewhat the peace that he and Finney once had. Into this new term, a new relationship materializes with his hallmate, Brinker. But we find out that Brinker is no Finney. He's a man that follows the rules and applies them, and it is through Brinker and his weird sense of humor and his kangaroo court in the butt room, the room in the basement where the boys are allowed to go and smoke, that Gene first faces outside forces accusing him of Finney's fall. Up to now, there's been sort of a gentleman's agreement between him and Finney, yet an intense fight within himself as he tries to grapple with the guilt of his actions. Now, however, Brinker, somewhat humorously, accuses him in front of the butt room mock crowd. Here's your prisoner, gentlemen. I'm turning him over to the proper authorities. What's the charge? Doing away with the roommate so that he could have a room to himself. Practically fratricide. To all of this, Gene answers with a mock confession, admitting his guilt and embellishing the crime to further hide his own despair, and leaves the boys to return to his French studies. It is at this point the main counterbalance to the peace of Devon enters. The war inserts itself into the life of Devon in two subsequent episodes. First, the boys have to go help collect apples at an apple orchard that's been abandoned, most possibly because laborers have been drafted or are already off at war. The second intrusion is a bit more ominous. The boys are shipped to a nearby town to clear the railroad tracks of snow from a recent storm that has piled snow up so high that it blocks the tracks and stops all train movement. Gene describes the day. The playful atmosphere of the apple orchard was gone. Of the town, we could see some dull red brick mills and warehouses surrounding the yard, and we labored away among an old man directing us called to the rolling stock, grim freight cars from many parts of the country immobilized by the snow. Rolling stock? No. Brinker asked him if we could call it unrolling stock now. The old man looked back at him with bleary dislike and didn't reply. Nothing was funny about that day. The work became hard and unvarying. I began to sweat under layers of clothes. By the middle of the afternoon, we had lost our fresh volunteer look. The grime of the railroad and the exhaustion of manual labor were on us all. The old man resented us. As the boys clear the track, a troop train passes by, filled with young soldiers, not too much older than we were, says Gene. Gene is struck by the contrast. Stranded here in this Milltown Railroad while the whole world was converging elsewhere, we seemed to be nothing but children playing among heroic men. Returning back to Devon and to the dorm, Gene finds, much to his surprise, that Finney has returned on a cane. With Finney's return, there's the possibility of peace returning to Devon. The boys seem to fall back into their old routine, but with Finney unable to do athletics, he sets out to train Gene for the upcoming Olympics, which Finney plans Gene to win at all events. Behind this peaceful scene in fantasy, however, the war is still present. Brinker and Gene had talked about joining up together, but Finney's return to Devon ends that talk and ends one of the main forces behind that temporary friendship, that is, Brinker's and Gene's. And though that breaks a momentary commitment to the war, Gene is still forced to deal with Finney's new unrealistic fantasy that there is no war. That is Finney's solution to the unpeaceful world around him. Deny it by interjecting his own peace. Therefore, it's not. And this he does. There is no peace at Devon. There needs to be peace at Devon. And Finney sets out to reestablish it. Finney realizes that in this winter dread, something needs to be remedied. And he begins building, or at least thinking, about the Devon Winter Carnival, a winter festival similar to the summer fun and games. Finney presides over the action, which includes a ski jump, a prize table, and jugs of hard cider guarded by Brinker. At the signal, Chet Douglas blows his bugle and the boys begin to attack Brinker and raid the cider. In the midst of the riot, Gene pours cider down Brinker's throat, and Brinker declares the game's open, but Finney, however, objects and officially opens the game with the burning of a copy of the Iliad. sort of a sacred fire from the Olympus. The boys, excited by the cider, throw themselves into the game while Finney, atop the prize table, dances on one leg. Gene surprises himself athletically. Freed by the carnival's imaginative escape from the realities of war, Gene says, "It was this liberation that we had torn from the gray encroachments of 1943, the escape that we had concocted, this afternoon of momentary, illusory, special, and separate peace." But that separate peace is quickly broken by a telegram that arrives from Lepper, the boy who left Devon for the military to become a member of the Nordic Ski Patrol. The telegram was simple, but an intrusion, and it shatters the momentary peace. "I have escaped and need help. I am at Christmas location, you understand. No need to risk address here. My safety depends on your coming at once. Your best friend, Elwyn Lepper Lepellier." Gene is called away from the calm of Devon into the bitter winter of Vermont, Lepper's home state, but also into Lepper's new world, a world of psychosis, a psychosis that Gene grows to realize caused by the war. The starkness of the cold November countryside and the stark reality of Lepper's new condition unnerves Gene. But more unnerving is Lepper's accusations, rather vividly, of Gene's culpability in Finney's fall. Lepper declares that Gene is savage underneath, which causes Gene once again to face the feeling of guilt that he has hidden within himself. Accused and judged, Gene responds to the revelation of his own dark instincts with his own dark instincts, his secret impulses, and knocks Lepper from the chair, just as he once pushed Finney away from the tree. Gene is once again exposed to his guilt and also realizes now that someone else other than he and Finney knows the truth. Unable to understand and sympathize with Lepper's true condition and unable to cope with Lepper's accusation, Gene runs, leaving Lepper alone on a snowy hillside as Gene returns to Devon. Arriving back at school, Gene finds Finney has set up yet another escape for the boys, a blitzball-like snowball fight where there are no rules and are no sides. Somewhat ironically, the snowball fight is one of the last peaceful events at Devon that winter, and it dissolves into an every man for himself, with Finney switching sides to help one side or the other, one boy or another boy, until finally all the boys turn on Finney and the game ends. After the fake war, Gene has to explain the reality of his visit to Lepper. That in fact, Lepper was not home on leave from the war, as the boys had fantasized about Lepper's exploits during the war in the butt room, but that he was actually AWOL. Gene also has to disclose that Lepper is psychotic. This upsets the equilibrium of the whole group, but also jars Finney into admitting his beliefs about war were all wrong, and admits to Gene that he's actually written to all branches of the service, but has been given nothing but rejection. It is into this situation where the war has invaded the peaceful relationship of Finney and Gene that a new invasion happens to threaten and strain the friendship. Brinker breaks in and leads the boys to a final version of his trial in the assembly room, where he seeks, with his group of black robe accomplices, to find the truth about Finney's fall from the tree. The trial is confusing to all because stories differ. Finney makes them up as the questions are asked, and Jean falls into line with each of them until psychotic leper appears as a witness and explains what really happened. They moved like an engine. I can't think of the name of the engine, but it has two pistons. What is that engine? Well, anyway, in this one engine, one piston sinks and then the other one sinks. The one holding onto the trunk for a second, up and down like a piston, then the other one sank and fell. The truth is out. Finney reacts violently, especially to Brinker's pursuing questions, trying to get to the facts. Finney finally lashes out, "You get your facts. You get your effing facts. They're all the effing facts there are in the world." He plunges out of the room, cane in hand. Jean and the other boys hear the rapping cane and the rapid rapping cane as it goes down, and then the general tumult of a body falling clumsily down the white marble. Finney's second fall. With Finney's second fall, peace at Devon is completely shattered. And Jean, once again, is face to face with his guilt that leads him into a dark night of self-soul searching, which in turn leads to the final meeting of the two friends and the resolution of the conflict between them and within Jean. It is this final discussion that leads both to a total acceptance of the other. Finney forgiving Jean by acknowledging and accepting that Jean acted out of some kind of blind impulse rather than hatred. Finney says, "I think I can believe that. I've gotten awfully and sometimes almost mad and sometimes forgotten what I was doing. I think I can believe you. I think I can believe that. It wasn't anything you felt against me. It wasn't some kind of hate that you felt all along. It wasn't personal." Jean once again accepts Finney's analysis and added that he acted indeed based on some ignorance inside. The friends are united with a new set of truths to believe in and live with. But of course, Finney dies on the operating table from marrow traveling from his broken leg to his heart and his brain, leaving Jean to live with the finality of their friendship for the rest of his life. A Separate Peace has World War II as an ever-present background, as I've mentioned, and continues to inch its way into the novel in interesting ways. It also is interesting that the title of the novel comes from Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms, another war story. The protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, says that he has made a separate peace, and then he deserts the Italian army after a lengthy time of disillusionment. Well then, what about the title of our novel, A Separate Peace? What is that peace? And where is it found? And how is it preserved? Well, I'm not going to go there. Why don't we save this for the panel discussion? I would like to leave it there with a question about Jean's personal peace and ask a question or two for you to consider. Does he ever come to grips with peace in himself? A peace that forgives his hateful, spiteful deed? John Knowles, in an essay, My Separate Peace, published in Esquire in 1985, talks about the book as autobiographical and suggests that parts of Jean are in him. What I set out to do in the novel was to unscramble, plumb, and explain what had happened during the very peculiar summer at Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, where I was a 16-year-old summer session student in 1943. It was just as World War II was turning in our favor, and were we boys going to be in it or not? And was war? And what was war? What was aggression? And what were loyalties and rivalry? What were goodness and hate and fear and idealism? All of them swirling around us during that peculiar summer. Beneath Jean and Finney's great friendship in these idyllic countrified surroundings, there is a lurking rivalry, hostility, and destructiveness. He goes on to say, a separate piece is one long and abject confession, a mea culpa, a tale of crime, if there had been a crime, and of no punishment or only interior punishment. It is a story of growth through tragedy, end quote. In that authorial analysis lies my question for each of you readers. Do you agree with Knowles? Is the novel a long confession, and if so, what is the solution? Is there absolution as I suggested? If so, is it accepted by our narrator? And if accepted, does he forgive himself? And does he grow from this whole experience? What is that growth? And if he suggests at the finish of his return to Devon after 15 years in that first chapter that he has changed, how has he changed? Thank you.